Hi, I'm Donna Rutherford, and today we're going to be talking about solving genealogical puzzles using DNA. So what sort of genealogical puzzles might you have? Well, one of the most well-known ones is really if you're an adoptee, foundling or donor conceived where you have unknown parents. You could also have unknown grandparents or great-grandparents, and that could be because there's no father named on a birth certificate. DNA testing can uncover these mysteries that you didn't actually know you even had. So you may find your father is not your bio father, a sibling is only a half sibling, or you have a mysterious group of matches in your match list, or you could have an unknown close match. Now this can happen when you take a DNA test, so be prepared that you could find surprises you weren't expecting. DNA can also be used to solve those brick walls in your genealogy. It is being used more often now for cold cases and law enforcement cases as well for violent crime. Cold cases, usually John Doe cases. We call this investigative genetic genealogy. If you're a king buried under a car park, then DNA may also be useful in solving who you are. And of course, I'm talking about Richard III case in Leicester, where mitochondrial DNA was used to solve who the king was. Now, DNA may only be part of the solution, so genealogy and other evidence can be required to solve your genealogical puzzle as well. It's not necessarily just DNA. So how do you go about solving DNA puzzles? Well, the majority of these genealogical puzzles can be solved with an autosomal DNA test. Why is that? Well, autosomal DNA tests are good for the genealogical time frame, so we're talking about 5 to 6 generations back. They also cover all parts of your tree, so paternal and maternal. You can also do an autosomal DNA test whether you're male or female. It makes no difference for these types of tests. Sometimes DNA will actually throw up that mystery that you didn't even know you had. And this is sometimes where we have what we call NPEs, and I'll probably refer to this a few times. An NPE means non-paternal event or non-parental event. Sometimes it's now often called misattributed parentage. And it generally means where the person on the birth certificate is not actually the biological parent. So this is often the man. So the father named on the birth certificate is not actually the biological father. You can find that your sibling is only a half sibling, you weren't prepared for that, or your cousin might only end up being a half cousin matching only one of your grandparents, or a close family member may not match you. You could test a second cousin. Now we know that with autosomal DNA, you must match all your second cousins and closer. So if you're matching someone if you're testing someone within that range and they don't match you, that is a mystery you need to solve as well. Now the answers to all our genealogical puzzles are in our DNA matches. We just need to know how to find them. So what types of DNA tests could we do that would help us with our mysteries? Well, the first one is the autosomal DNA test. Ancestry is the biggest database, so it is the best place to test first. MyHeritage, excellent for European matches. A lot of Europeans are using MyHeritage for testing. 23andMe, you do need to test there. You can't upload into their database. They do have the second biggest database. Family tree DNA, FTDNA, you can also, if you test with them, it's a scrape test, you can also use that same sample to do Y-DNA testing and mitochondrial DNA testing, so you can upgrade that later. Living DNA is a great site for British breakdown and all the regions within Britain. Although Ancestry and MyHeritage are now doing a very good job with their genetic groups or their genetic communities, which will give you that closer breakdown specifically within the UK. Genealogical is fairly new. You can upload to Genealogical. It's excellent for French DNA testers and French matches. GEDmatch is a public DNA database, and you can upload any of your tests to GEDmatch and get matches there with people who have tested on other sites. And there are some specific tests that you can, reports you can run there that can be helpful in solving some of your mysteries. Always read the privacy, security, law enforcement type settings that are on the site that you're uploading to make sure you're comfortable putting your DNA on those sites. Family tree DNA and GEDmatch, for example, both allow law enforcement into their databases, and there are parts of that you can opt out of. Y DNA is for men only because only men carry the Y chromosome. It is the patrilineal line only, so father's line, but it can help you uncover a surname. So if you've got a mystery to solve, it can be useful if you're looking for somebody on that particular patrilineal line to have an idea what their surname might be. It is deep ancestry, but you never know whether you might get a close match there as well. If you do get matches there, and sometimes unfortunately you don't, if you do get matches there, you're looking for matches that have a common surname, and that could be your surname. I suggest just starting with a low marker test, so a Y37, that would give you some matches. And if you're interested in Y-DNA, of course, you can go further. Mitochondrial DNA is the least useful for genealogy purposes. It was, in fact, the type of DNA done for Richard III. It is less useful for our closer genealogy timeframe mysteries. Both men and women can do a mitochondrial DNA test. It is the matrilineal line, so mother's mother. But mothers pass on their mitochondrial DNA to all of their children. So both men and women do have mitochondrial DNA and can do a mitochondrial DNA test. Something to watch out for is artifact testing. This is becoming more and more popular. It is still relatively expensive and it is an emerging science, and there still is a lot of work to be done. But if you have an artifact, so hair, letters, stamps, those types of things, and you think that somebody has left their DNA on them and you want to get them tested, that is possible now. They're even looking at being able to extract autosomal DNA from hair, which in the past hasn't been possible. People often tell you need the root of the hair. They're looking at other ways to do it, but that is very, very, very new and not yet proven. If you do have artifacts you think you want tested and will help you with some of these things at a later date, make sure you're keeping them out of the way of any contamination now. Keep them in paper bags, well away from direct sunlight, and places where other people can't leave their DNA on them. You do need some techniques to start solving your DNA mysteries. The techniques you need to learn about are clustering. In fact, my last talk was on clustering and building research trees. So if you've got access to that, it's well worth a watch, and it will take you through this in detail. Clustering is what we do when we group our matches together into what we call genetic networks. And we need to know how to build research trees. These are often called quick and dirty trees. We keep these types of trees private and unsearchable, but we use them to work out who the common ancestor of these clusters are. And one thing we need to learn to do is identify our matches. Not all our matches have got trees or identifiable information obvious on the site, so we need to use some other techniques to find them, and that could be sleuthing them by looking for them on social media, for example. Other things we might need to look at is additional testing. Can Y-DNA be useful in the type of mystery we want to have? Is this a mystery on the father's line? And we should be looking to fish in all the ponds, so getting into the other sites. Ethnicity estimates can be clues to something we're trying to solve as well. So we know ethnicity estimates aren't the most scientific part of a DNA test, but certainly they can provide us with some clues, and I'm going to show you some examples of that later. Start thinking about using other third-party tools. Auto-clustering, fabulous tool to help you with your clustering. And that is available at, the Auto Cluster tool is available at MyHeritage and at GEDmatch in their paid section at GEDmatch. And there is a site called Genetic Affairs. The man behind the Auto Cluster technology is E.J. Blom, and he has a website, Genetic Affairs, well worth having a look at to help you with clustering. The Watto tool, what are the odds? This helps you work out where you fit with a group of matches. So when you've solved a group of matches and you know the common ancestor of that group of matches, you can use the What Are the Odds tool at DNA Painter to work out where you might fit. And of course the shared centimorgan project, which we probably know quite well, where we can go and enter the centimorgan amount and get a prediction of how somebody might match us, what that relationship might be. So we do need to understand the centimorgans. The total shared centimorgans is where you're going to be looking most to predict a relationship. Segments are usually not of a lot of use unless you've come from an endogamous population. And the total shared centimorgans will help you predict a relationship to you. Beware of confirmation bias. It can really creep in when we're trying to solve genealogical puzzles. Sometimes we hear a family story and we use our DNA to try and prove the family story. We really should be using DNA to try and disprove these stories and see if it actually stands up when we try and disprove it. Be very careful of interpreting what a match is, specifically a match under about 30 centimorgans. Some of these matches can be false or can be very distant. Now, some genetic genealogists who have tested both parents have found up to 33% of their matches don't match either parent, and that means it must be a false positive. So be very careful when you're interpreting smaller matches. Also, be very careful with the site hints. They are a hint. They're not necessarily going to solve a genealogical puzzle for you, and as we might see later, they could actually point you in completely the wrong direction.
We hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave a like. To watch the extended, uninterrupted version, go to familyhistory.tv, link in the description. You will also find a host of talks from other experts on a variety of subjects. Don't forget to subscribe to get notified when these videos become available.